harmful not only to society, but more importantly to the individuals who engage in that behavior.
You don't need to be in the pew every Sunday to know that there's something wrong in this country when gays can serve openly in the military.
People who are trapped in the homosexual lifestyle, they're in constant rebellion with order, with their natural order, with natural law.
If there's one characteristic trait of the gay agenda in the public school system, it's this: it's sneaky. It's usually designed to look like something else. It's disguised as something else.
The reason that HIV was invented as the cause of AIDS is it was a way to get research money.
We have to understand barbarians need to be educated. They need to be disciplined. And just because someone feels it or thinks it doesn't mean that we're supposed to go down that road.
We went from Lawrence versus Texas to now a constitutional right to same-sex marriage, and they're going into a constitutional right to polyamorous relationships. This is the slippery slope.
I have a book called The Marketing of Evil by David Kapelian, and it tells how expert genius Harvard marketers actually came up with the word gay rights so that the American public would accept it as natural behavior.
If you're involved in the gay and lesbian lifestyle, it's bondage. It is personal bondage, personal despair, and personal enslavement. And that's why this is so dangerous.
All gays who are born gay are overwhelmingly conservative, maybe apolitical. And all those angry gays causing trouble for everybody, I don't even think they were born gay.
Sexuality, specifically LGBTQ+ sexuality, seems to be the biggest taboo and everyone's business. You need only ask a queer person about their experiences to know the misconceptions are rampant in regards to their lives. Sexual activity is similarly laden with incorrect ideas and misleading information. From porn to rape culture to the ways that media censors language about female pleasure while making male pleasure the norm. We are a civilization that exists because of the act of sex, but we aren't very good at talking about it. So here, I'm going to take some time to do just that. Talk about sexuality, talk about sex, and break down just some of the ways we get things wrong and how we might just get things right. Let's get right into it with misconception number 1, that labels about sexuality and gender identity are somehow new concepts, and more than this, that they are hard to understand. While the labels we use surrounding sexuality are always changing and the ways we think about sexuality are always developing, as my groupmate Abby mentioned in a previous video, sexuality and gender are social constructions and not biological facts. The ancient Greeks had pederasty, which involved men of influence and age taking on a sexual relationship with a young boy. Women in the 1900s had Boston marriages, where 2 adult women would cohabitate together. The Stonewall Riots, which are widely regarded as the historical event that spearheaded the gay liberation movement, happened in the late 1960s, more than 50 years ago. Heterosexuality has never been the only reality, and our understandings of heterosexuality are as new and impermanent as our understandings of queer sexuality. So we have to see sexuality and gender labels as similarly fluid. And I think when we're older, there's going to be some sort of new term, new idea of thinking about sex and sexuality that is so out of the realm of what we understand right now, that if we were watching it too, I don't think we'd be like boomers and, you know, say, I don't mind, we didn't have any of this stuff, like it's confusing, whatever. But it might be something where we have to take a moment to adjust and rethink the entire way we think about sexuality and gender, or whatever they call it. There's going to be probably a whole other term and way of thinking about being that doesn't even include sexuality and gender. It'll probably just be like, you are a person. You are individual, you know? So
that's how I kind of feel like, at least like the queer term queer is probably the most fitting for me right now, because it's like, when I came out as bisexual to my family and like friends, it felt very free, and it's like now I can like talk to whoever I want. I don't feel like constricted to only supposed to be liking men or whatever. But after I'm like still like going through it, like if I label myself as a lesbian, it feels like I'm putting myself back into the like secluded spot just with the other side of things, basically. Yeah. And so it's kind of just like, might go for it, 'cause I'm comfortable with that term, but also like it changes so much even just within these last like year and a half, that I'm just like, is it necessary though? Like, you know, like labeling, it's just kind of like, love who you want to love.
We have the ability to adapt to a world where large-scale social decisions are made via apps on a cell phone. We spent the last few years trying to adapt to life during a pandemic. We are constantly existing in a social schema where ideas, people, and norms are in flux. So excuse me if I find it hard to believe that anyone can have a truly difficult time adjusting to saying they instead of he, or just acknowledging that another person's feelings about themselves are true. Next up is misconception number 2, the idea that LGBTQ plus individuals are more or too promiscuous. While there's never a justification for being homophobic, I think the topic around which homophobes feel the most justified is when it comes to the sex lives of queer people. They use words like perverse and sinful, or just outright talk about how they don't like how queer people show off their sex lives. They point to drag shows and pride parades, places where queer individuals are finally given the freedom to express themselves in what is meant to be a safe environment. They look at these examples as equivalents to talking about queer identity, to children, or highlighting queer figures in history. Obviously, representation of queer lives isn't just drag shows and pride parades, though these are certainly great too. Just like representations of straight lives isn't just seen in shows like The Bachelor. Because that's the thing, we see heterosexual sex lives all the time. In the mainstream media, in TV commercials, in classrooms, and in most homes. LGBTQ plus people have reclaimed the right to show off their sex lives because the media and popular culture won't let them see themselves represented. This reclaiming is not a sign that they are more promiscuous, but a sign that the media and our culture as a whole does a poor job of giving their lives visibility. The promiscuity label given to LGBT, you know what, queer people, because apparently I can't speak right now, because I think that is something that's huge. You know, whenever I hear arguments against teaching, like the law that's in Florida right now.
Don't say gay bill.
Yeah, the Don't Say Gay bill, which talks about like having to out students, and you can't mention anything LGBTQ plus in the classroom. You know, if you have parents that are LGBTQ plus, you can't talk about that. The arguments I hear is that it shouldn't be talked about because it's bringing sex into the classrooms, which is so confusing to me. How individuals loving each other and being in relationships is somehow bringing sex into the classroom, because then you'd have to argue you can't talk about parents, period, or babies, or human beings, because we only exist because of sex. Like, the whole system just breaks down. So I think talking about how y'all view the ideas of promiscuity on the LGBTQ plus community, if you have any ideas on the topic.
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of like obviously the whole Don't Say Bill thing, or Don't Say Gay bill, like, it doesn't make sense to have to out a kid and then not be able to speak about it, because just simply by outing them, you're speaking about it. So it's a whole contradictory in itself. But they're trying, like, I mean, mental health obviously is a huge issue overall, and is getting a lot more attention. And they stress about how you need to talk about, like communicate your feelings kind of thing. That I see a whole, like, mental health issue with it. I mean, it's more with the, like, Don't Say Gay bill specifically, but with, like, how, like, queer people struggle to talk about that stuff a lot, or like as you're growing up. I mean, like now in college I just talk about with whoever. I'm like, I'd rather come out to you know if you're homophobic sooner than later, you know, like don't invest anything into it then. But like feeling so restricted and not being able to talk about who you are, like at your core as a person, or even just trying to figure that out, because talking about it is what made me even figure all of it out, just being able to walk through it with my roommates. And so I think that if it's continued to be like restricted, or people are not supposed to be comfortable talking about it, it's going to lead to just even more, like, mental health issues down the line, too, with not being able to communicate, like, because, like, just who you are as a person is, like, the most, like, important thing you can talk about, because it figures out, like, it helps with your career path, it helps get into college, like, just everything, knowing who you are, like, is what's going to make you happy. So I think it just needs to be talked about, like, everything, like...
Queer communities are more vocal about sex because the American school system often fails to educate queer youth about what their sex lives might look like. Without talking about it or teaching it, there are very few resources, besides pornography, for individuals to learn more about their sexuality. And oftentimes, representation of queer relationships in pornography involves heterosexual actors playing out homosexual sex. Perhaps the promiscuity police should take a moment to consider that the only avenue of information they're leaving to queer people is porn, since we all know that would go over well. And importantly, OkCupid, the dating site, published a study of their match statistics that showed among individuals using the app who were typically between the ages of 19 and 34, there's only a 1 percentage point difference in promiscuity between heterosexual and homosexual individuals in terms of sexual partners. So LGBTQ plus individuals of that age group aren't even more promiscuous in the first place. Misconception number 3 is the idea that homophobia is no longer a relevant issue. The first indication of this comes with the idea that marriage equality, as in the ability of queer people to now be legally married in all 50 states, is somehow the same as the end of homophobia. Importantly, though, marriage is still a binding of individuals within a patriarchal and heterosexual structure. While this doesn't mean marriage shouldn't be a right, it is deeply meaningful to people, and it should. It does mean that having access to marriage is not the same as equality, but is more like assimilation. To better explain this, imagine you know someone with a whole truckload of peaches. Now, they're only giving these peaches out to people they think are like them. This is obviously not ideal, so they say, okay, now everyone can have peaches. That's awesome. But maybe not everyone wants peaches. Maybe they want strawberries. Or better hate crimes laws, or media representations, or for states not to make don't say peaches laws. If you get what I'm saying, homophobia is still real, and if my previous example didn't do a great job alluding to it, bills like Florida's Don't Say Gay bill are perfect examples happening right now of homophobia. I feel like you can look at that. I think it's fascinating too because the numbers just surpass. I don't know if you saw that straight couples have higher, if you're straight, you have a higher chance of getting AIDS because the stigma was so heavy that LGBTQ plus people are so hyper careful of not getting STDs because again, they don't want to be the person that someone points to and says, see what I told you. And I think you're absolutely right about that. They're looking for something to point at, but it's just so funny to me because I just think of like reality TV and how you will see people, you know, the cameras will go blank and you'll just hear people talking and they're like fully fucking. Yeah. Like, you know, they're fully fucking. You're like, and we're like casual ABC. And like that's what we're seeing on the TV while just at home, kids are walking in and out, whatever. Yeah. But the idea, you're right, like a queer couple hugging is like the same level of taboo because their sex lives are looked at. And part of me is just thinking, straight people, why do you care so much? You know, it's one of those things, but honestly, like, why do you care so much? It's like homophobia in general. Why would you care unless you were kind of jealous? You know what I'm saying? If I came up to you and I was like, I hate dogs. I hate them so much. I actually despise them, and if you put one near me, I'm gonna vomit. You'd be like, what the fuck is your deal with dogs? Like, why are you so why do you care so much? It's probably because you have had some feelings about... I've had some feelings about dogs, clearly. I've been thinking about it a little too much. Yeah. So I feel like when straight people get so focused on the like sex lives of gay people, it's because they want to know more. Yeah. They're interested. They're piqued.
Well, it's like, in my head, it's like, if you hate it that much or if it like disgusts you kind of thing, why wouldn't you just like put it out of your mind then if that's the issue like you like mentioned? It's like clearly it's on your mind kind of thing. You're thinking about it. Like, if you... like. I don't know, I'm trying to think of something I, like, would really hate. Like, when I was younger, hated vegetables. It's, like, not gonna go around, I hate vegetables, I'm just simply not gonna eat them.
Trans women of color are still being killed at disproportionately high rates. Religious trauma and forms of excommunication and conversion therapy are a reality. More states are trying to make it illegal to acknowledge queer lives, to teach queer education, or to protect queer people. Homophobia still exists, and if you think that it doesn't, it's time to acknowledge that you are comfortable with a certain level of hate, which means you're a homophobe. With everything discussed so far, it's easy to see how shame can play into upholding misconceptions and encouraging oppression, which brings us to misconception number 4, this idea that talking about sex should be shameful. As a society, we do still shame sex, and the hammer of judgment from that shame comes down on individuals having sex in a way that is considered wrong. Typically, these individuals are members of marginalized groups. We have to acknowledge how shrouding sex in this shame affects our society. Survivors of assault often don't speak up due to feelings of shame, or that they did something wrong. Queer people are in a double bind of talking about sex and affirming the incorrect idea that they are promiscuous, or not talking about sex and denying their identity. Women face being called slurs for being open about their sex life, or for being sex positive. None of these factors is good for anyone, and good sex is never going to be the result of shame. That idea of being over-sexual is what keeps, sex education for queer people out of classrooms, which means that those individuals can't be truly themselves because they don't have the steps and the knowledge to know what to do. And so they're probably going to places like porn to get that, which is typically straight people playing at being gay, which it doesn't teach good lessons about consent or what that should look like, period. But then more than that, it makes it so that those individuals don't have any sense of themselves anywhere. I think we're luckier than our parents were, where we can see queer characters in television presented in a way that it's not all about their sex life.
Yes.
They are human beings outside of that. But for a lot of people, that's where it ends. And so that creates a way that I am proudly sexual, but sometimes it can feel like a double bind where I either have to say I'm not sexual so I don't feel judged, or like I'm placing the whole community on my shoulders and being like, oh, now everyone's going to see her being hypersexual and think the community's hypersexual, or to let go of that part of myself that's sex positive and be the conservative gay person, which is what's acceptable right now. I mean, think of the acceptable gay people in our society. They're white men, typically. They're Modern Family gay people. They're Pete Buttigieg gay people. They're not trans black women gay people, unless they're RuPaul and they're into fracking. So we're still not loving it,
Yeah. Well, and sorry, just the aspect you bring up about being overly sexual. I feel like that's just homophobia at play, because it's okay, so you're gonna talk about the straight couples then? Because I'm I don't really see how there's a difference. It's just more so the fact that it's getting normal attention, like a straight couple is being seen as over-sexual because they're trying to restrict them. So it's anything past giving your partner a hug on the street is, you're pushing it. I don't know.
Sex is natural, normal, and if consent is done right and boundaries are appreciated, it can be really fun. Putting shame on sex encourages misogynistic, homophobic tendencies. No one should have to talk about a topic like sex if they don't want to. And for individuals like asexual people, sex may not be as prominent a factor in their lives. But by normalizing conversations around sex, we grow not only as individuals, but as a society willing to encompass many different types of physical and emotional loving. It would take people a lot smarter than I am, with a lot more time, to cover all of the misconceptions in the realm of sexuality and sexual activity. It's important to note that women of color have often been the leaders of thought in relation to progress for LGBTQ+ individuals and for sexually liberated individuals, and they have been those leaders in movements that historically ignored their voices. If you want to learn more about sexuality, sexual liberation, or about activist ideals in general, consider taking the time to learn more about these activists that laid the foundation for everything discussed in the video today. This list is not even close to exhaustive, but will hopefully allow the conversations on sexuality and sexual liberation to continue beyond this video. Keep an eye out because we've got another new video coming out in a few weeks. Thanks for watching.